Hey, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Indy Investor Pod. I got my good friend Stacy Patlan joining me on here today. I'm excited to talk to her. It's funny, we've been talking about like, oh man, we need to do a podcast together for a while now. We just have never been able to coordinate times. And also, she's been in the process of doing a new build. And we were like, hey, let's get that underway. And let's. I want to hear all those crazy stories, and she put some fun stories that are coming out of that project as well. So we're gonna dig into that a little bit. But Stacy, number one, thanks a lot for joining me on here today.
Thanks. I really appreciate you having me.
Yeah, no problem. So I feel like Stacy, with you, I feel like you are just involved in just a little bit of everything when it comes to real estate, no matter what it is. So
Yeah.
I know we've wholesale deals with you. You've flipped some properties. You're an awesome real estate realtor with Front Porch Real Estate. You are doing the new build right now. You're a great connection, just a great person through Cyre as well that people want to network with and connect with. So number one, just thank you for all you have been, just everything you've been providing, all the help, all the insights you've been giving to everybody. What I want to know is what were you doing before real estate? How did you even get into this, or what were you doing before that?
Before this, I was actually in nursing school at IUPUI. And Courtney, who's my partner, he was wholesaling, and I just was kind of burnt out. I was working in a hospital, and I enjoyed it, but I was tired. It was really emotionally draining. And he was like, well, why don't you just come work with me for a little while? Let's see how it goes. And I took the leap of faith. I quit my job and started working with him full time. And at that time, he had quit his full-time job. So we were both, it was kind of like sink or swim. We had savings for a few months, and if we didn't get a deal, then we were kind of like, well, I guess back to work we'll go. But from that point, we just started wholesaling, and it kind of led us on our entrepreneurial journey.
Yeah. So that's awesome. That'll definitely kind of light a little bit fire under you, and make sure those deals are happening when you have both quit your jobs and be able to get into that. So, but you're able to have a feedback plan as well. So nursing's a pretty good plan on stuff.
Yeah.
So what number one, what was Courtney doing? What was his day job that he quit?
So he was a semi driver. He drove 18 wheelers for Indianapolis Fruit, and he would drive to Cincinnati and back every day. It was a very tedious, it was tough. He would drive for 13, 14 hours a day. And we had just had Landon, who's our son now. He's 7, but he was a newborn. So I was at home and he was gone. And when he got back, it was like 9:00 at night, and then he'd have to wake up at 3 a.m. and do it all over again. So it was kind of time. It was one of those things. We were both like, we just started a family. If we're going to do it, let's just do it now before we get involved in landing in sports. And then we have no time, quote unquote. But I feel like it's been such a great journey.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. Maybe you guys being able to kind of take that risk and take that leap and be able to do that. And now seeing where you guys are now and the success that you guys have had, and just the energy and the passion that I see when you talk to either one of you guys about real estate is really cool to see as well. So I do want to talk to you about how is that working with you, working with your partner, of you guys doing this being in this together and kind of having the same job of like, oh crap, if we don't make it, we might not, but even just like what happens when, oh no, I want to do this deal, I don't want to do this deal, or hey, no, let's paint the floor this color, let's not. How's that working out with you guys?
In the beginning, I was really relying on him because I didn't know anything. Like, he had went to a few seminars, he had learned about wholesaling, he had went to, I think, one of the Fortune Builder, like, entry level classes. He had probably bought every wholesaling course in the world. We probably have about $100,000 worth of courses on our bookshelf. But I relied on him for learning because I wasn't really sure I was like, I don't know what we're doing. Yeah. So all he was like, here, write these addresses on these envelopes, put the stamp on it, and we're mailing it out. So we were doing mailers. But as we've evolved, working with your partner, it's definitely not easy because there isn't a go to work, come home. And so you have work life and home life. It's kind of all commingled. We'll be down at a really nice dinner, and then all of a sudden will say, hey, do you remember like what, so you never get off of the subject of real estate. And, partially because Courtney, I can turn it off, but Courtney, he does not turn it off. He's one of those people that when he gets into something, it just doesn't stop. And that's just the visionary in him. But now we have a pretty well set out. He deals with contractors, just because I honestly don't really like dealing with contractors. And then I deal with design. So I order products, I pick out all the finishes, I pick out trim, tile, all of that stuff. I also do the design. So like the floor layout. Sometimes we collab on it because, I might pick something out and he's like, that's, that's not going to work. And there's a lot of times where we'll be putting like one of our houses on Winthrop. We both bought this house and we're like, once we kind of designed it, we're like, we don't know how we feel about this one. And it turned out really nice.
Yeah.
And, he didn't like the floors I picked. He didn't really like how I designed where the bathroom was, but once it was all done, he's like, okay, this one actually looks really good. So yeah, there's some doubt in each other on certain parts, but we make it to the end.
There you go. But now you have the track record now where you can be like, hey, you're saying you don't like this, but just remember what happened with Winthrop? Yeah. That was a great project. So
yeah.
So
for sure.
Yeah. No, it's awesome. Let's take us a little bit through your journey then of kind of the timeline that you kind of got into, you guys getting up to being able to do a new build. So you guys are starting off, Courtney took all these classes and you're learning how to wholesale, you learn how to do this. How did that go from, okay, we're doing wholesaling to you becoming licensed to you guys doing flips to, hey, we're going to go from ground up and really get this thing underway and do that. So how that timeline take place?
So the timeline, it's probably been an 8-year timeline. He started in like 13, 14, and I kind of joined around 15, 16. The journey was really, we did some wholesaling. We had acquired a few rental properties through Subject 2. Some of those we did a little bit of rehab on. So that's kind of where we got a little bit of rehab experience. Yeah. We went to all of Dave's Dinner and a Deal mentorship classes. Courtney also probably annoyed the crap out of Dave because every time he saw him, he's like, hey, I want to flip a house. I see that you know what you're doing. Like, let me invest with you. Like, we probably had, I don't know, $40,000. And we were like, hey, like, can we park this with you? Like, we'll run around, get material. We just kind of were like, let us learn. And Dave didn't give us the time of day for a little while. But, they say the squeaky wheel gets oil. But from that point, Dave called us. This was probably like 2 years into our journey. He's like, hey, I know you guys want to flip a house. I know you've got about, $40,000. I've got a good flip for you. And this is 20 East Pleasant Run Parkway. And he bought it from Sheriff's Sale. He sold it to us as a wholesale. And he connected us with CPL.
Yeah. So
our first deal we did with CPL, we had the $40,000 for our skin in the game for a down payment and interest payments. That was the most trying experience of our lives. We were painting walls, laying we are hands-on investors, but not hands-on. Like, we don't do the work. You're probably not going to catch us with the paintbrush or screwdriver. Like, that's not us. But this house, we were carrying in drywall. We were setting the cabinets. We had called Pat Grayson. Pat Grayson was helping us lay floors. It was anything that could have went wrong. And it was just lack of experience and lack of knowledge. But we ended up making, I don't know, like $5,000 on that house. But the amount of education that we got, we got paid $5,000 to learn 6 months of rehabbing.
Yeah.
So that was definitely a turning point in our business. So from there, we started doing more flips. We kind of looked at we started getting other private money partners. I think that's just to kind of touch on, people are always like, where do you find the money? I think your first couple deals, you're going to have to pay those high interest rates to get some experience before a private lender is going to be like, here's my life savings at 8% or 10%. But anyway, so from that point, we got some private lenders, we did some partnerships, we continued to flip, we continued to wholesale. Now at this point, wholesaling is a little bit less active. We're probably doing like 6 a year. And it's more so just from deals that we're getting from other wholesalers, or, you know, we're flipping a house and the lady next door wants to sell and it might not really be a flip. So we're like, let's just sell it off. I know I think we've sold a couple to Ronnie. So it's kind of like, you know, when you're in the game, things just kind of come to you. But we're flipping probably, you know, 12 to 14 a year right now. And then where we got to the new build is we had a house. Now, we had always talked about wanting a new build. Like when kind of Fountain Square and Bates Hendricks were starting to blow up and there were a bunch of lots, and we're like, you know, do we do this? Do we not? We're like, we really haven't done anything like that. And I don't think there's really anything that can prepare you for it. We bought a house over in Butler, Tarkington, and the house came with a separate lot that was attached. So we separated the parcels, and we were either going to sell the lot for like 40 grand or we were going to build on it. And I think we went back and forth every other day. Like one day it was, we're selling it. I think I posted it on Facebook a couple times, took it down. and we finally were just like, let's just do it. And that's kind of where the new build came to life. And it was definitely a process.
So no, that's awesome. I love that. Thanks for sharing that timeline and just kind of your stuff. And I want to touch on a couple of things there real quick, and then kind of dig into a couple of things as well. But like when you get back to that first deal that you said, I love the way that you said that, of like, you got paid $5,000 for 6 months worth of experience in flipping a property. And that's such a great way to look at that, because that's really what happened there. Is like, people look at like, our first deal and the $5,000 on a flip, like that doesn't look like a very successful deal. That doesn't look like, you know, you guys, it's not what you guys want to do now. That's not your motto or anything like that. But like you said, of what you learned and just being able to do all that stuff is awesome. And that's really such a great way to look at it. And I want to ask you, like, would you change that at all? Like, if you would, like, it's kind of funny of like going back to that, of like, because I've seen people maybe on that first deal, what if you would have made $50,000, get into the next couple of deals, you would have made some of the same mistakes and not realize what you did wrong, but you learned all that within the first deal. So that's such a valuable thing. Right. That. So I love also, go ahead. Sorry.
No, I was going to say, I would not have taken that experience back. I mean, as a realtor, I work with tons of investors, and plus I'm very active in Cyria. I work with a bunch of out-of-state investors, and I get calls all the time of people like, I'm upside down like 50 grand. And, you know, part of it is, you know, sometimes some deals just go bad, but I think some people, they just don't understand the due diligence. They don't understand, you know, getting multiple opinions before jumping into a deal, especially if you've never done one before. Yeah. So you know, this one, we ran our numbers, we kind of did a repair scope, but we also relied on Dave. We were buying it from Dave. He had kind of walked us through kind of his scope of work. We did the complete opposite. I mean, we finished the basement. We did a bunch of really wacky stuff, which, I mean, it looked good, but he was like, I would have just came in here and put a new kitchen and bathroom in and sold it. Yeah. And we're like, no, let's just demo.
Yeah. I can see this is where you need like a little Dave on your shoulder of like, hey, this is what you should be doing right in your ear. So
well, and it's so funny because if you ask Dave about us, and you know, if you take him into we walk into a house, he's like, Courtney would say knock all the walls down, and I'm telling you just to change the kitchen. And that's kind of his motto. He likes those quick, you know, 6 to 8 week turns, and we're like, it's got plaster. It needs to come out, even if it looks good. Yeah. It's like, take it out, you know? Yeah. So, no, I think we kind of had a little bit of a guidance on that house. And then Dave, you definitely, when we kind of got into a couple questionable areas where we're like, we don't know what we're supposed to do here. He kind of stepped in and helped us out, partially because, you know, he knew he wanted us to succeed, and he sold us the deal. So he was a big part in our success on that house.
So no, thanks for sharing that. And one other thing that you mentioned in that story too about like how, when you start off, like don't be afraid of like the hard money or, some of the other things that you can do, because that's what we all had to do basically when we got started. And if you can do two or three of those and have those like case studies of like, hey, here's what I can do. Here's what I can do with your money. When you're able to
Yes.
do that, kind of have that credibility behind you, it's just going to help out those processes of being able to get private money and be able to go after people for that as
Yeah,
well. So yeah, really good tip there, Stacey. I really appreciate
absolutely.
that. So before we get into the new build, I do want to ask you when it comes to Indianapolis and flipping in Indianapolis, what are some of the things that maybe people that are flipping in Indianapolis, maybe they don't realize at first, because Indianapolis is maybe a little different market. So what are some of those things that really somebody might not consider if you're flipping, down south or out west or just somewhere else? But when you're flipping in Indianapolis, it's like, hey, this is something you have to consider, something you have to take into effect or take into consideration when you're doing this project. What's one of those things that maybe people don't think about when they're flipping here in Indy?
I think people don't think that we're an affordable market. So I think they think they can get stuff done for cheap, and I don't think they realize that the cost of labor right now is quite high. The cost of materials are quite high. You can come in here and do an entire flip for like 150 all in, but it's not going to be a cheap project. Like
Yeah.
I think people think they can find a lot of cheap flips because they're in a $150,000 neighborhood, and that's just not the case. I mean, the buyers still require a quality home, but you can see the difference. I mean, you see the houses that have sat for 220 days on the market, and the seller's like, why isn't this thing selling? I'm like, well, you left knob and tube in the walls.
Right.
Like you tore all the drywall out, but left knob and tube in the walls.
Yeah.
That's why it's not selling. So I think that's the biggest thing, is just kind of being aware that, yes, I understand we're an affordable market, but don't be cheap on it.
Yeah. No, I think that's great advice. And actually it kind of, piggybacks off of what we just said about, using a hard money lender. When you're starting off, you might need to use a hard money lender. You might need to pay a little bit more for your money, but it's to get those projects underway. It's kind of the same thing on the contractor side too. It's like, you might need to pay a little bit more for maybe a better project manager or somebody that's overseeing everything and something like that, to be able to understand the process or be able to build your own crews and do stuff like that. So sometimes you have to pay a little bit more, but make sure you're getting done right. That's the main thing. When it comes
Yeah.
to all this stuff. So no, good stuff. Love it. As far as, so with this new build, let's go ahead and start digging into that. Cause I know that's why I wanted to have you on here. And you told me at the beginning before we started recording, like, oh yeah, we got some fun stories. This is the way that you put it and stuff.
Yeah.
But so we're talking about that let's just start with right from the start of being able to, hey, get this rezone and get the permits and being able to even just start, digging.
Yeah.
How did that go about, and what's some advice you have for some people that are out there thinking about this?
That was probably the biggest learning curve, because there is absolutely no manual on Indianapolis's website on how to get permits to do a new build. They don't tell you what you need. So it was very much trial and error. We did hire an expediter. I would not recommend doing that, but we did hire an expediter who was kind of helpful. Honestly, I think Pat Grayson with Stolco is kind of our biggest help, because he hasn't done a new build, but he's built garages and things like that. So he's like, well, these are the items you're probably going to need. So we didn't have to rezone it. We bought a house and it came with an extra lot. We separated the lot. They were already parceled separately, but we just had to get a new address. So we had to email like 5 different people in the city to get a new address, at which case they picked the address. I wanted to pick the address, but that's no big deal. So they ended up picking the address. And then from there, we got a survey, which that took about 3 weeks for the survey to come out. I think we paid about $850. I think it was True North was the company. So they came out and did the survey. There was already a garage on the lot, so they had to sketch out where the garage was. And that was something we needed to pull the building permits. One thing we did do was we had talked to a couple structural engineers and architects here about getting floor plans, and they're like, oh yeah, probably like $3,000 for some floor plans. And we're like, what? $3,000 for some paper? So we went online and found a rendering of a house, and we ended up buying the floor plans for $900. Not a big mistake, but a pretty significant one.
Was this one of those mistakes that we were just talking about of like, hey, you might have to pay a little bit more for hard money. You might have to pay a little bit more for a project manager. Was this one, hey, pay a little bit more for
Yes,
the blueprints and the plans?
absolutely, absolutely, because they could be modified. Like if there was something you wanted to, so basically the engineer or the whoever designed it, it's for all of the country. So they just use a general code book, which is fine. It meets all of the standards. But something that's required in California might not be required here, but it's included in our house. For say 2x6 walls and not 2x4 walls. So a big difference in cost. Big difference in cost, especially right now. So we had already submitted our plans that had 2x6 walls, so we could not change it. I mean, we could, but we'd have to submit it again, wait another 30 days. And at that point, it's like, do we wait 30 days or do we just bite the bullet? So we just decided to buy the 2x6 walls. So that was a mistake. Also, you know, the prints were vague. There were some things on there that like they didn't have the water heater included in the house anywhere. So we had to find out where we were going to put the water heater. So there was some small things that people were asking us questions on and that we couldn't answer. Like our foundation guy had asked us a couple questions about the foundation. And he's like, look, I've done thousands of foundations and I've never seen prints this like ABC. It's like, oh crap. And I don't know. I've never done a foundation. I've never built a house. So you're asking the wrong person.
Yeah.
So that was probably one of our regrets is kind of cheaping out on that. It took us, instead of spending the extra money, it took us extra time to research it on our own, emailing the original architect who's probably managing, 2,000 different prints. So then he has to look ours up, takes him a week to get back to us. So that was an experience. Also, when we started, it was prior to COVID, or it might have been right around when COVID started, and lumber had not went up yet. From the moment I priced out our original lumber package, we were at like $16,000 for everything. By the time we ended up purchasing our lumber package, that doubled. We paid like $32,000 for a lumber package.
Wow. So
that was a major hit in our budget. Luckily, we gained some appreciation, so we made up for that. But to account for an extra $16,000 just in material was crazy. Yeah. Also, the prints were not super detailed in materials, so we did have to go back and get a couple things, like the material count was wrong on the print, so we had to buy a few extra squares of siding, a few extra squares of shingles. So it was a lot of back and forth that I think could have been avoided if we wouldn't have tried to save, quote unquote, that initial couple $1,000s.
Yeah. So once you good tips right there. I really appreciate that and stuff. And once you got into the project, you guys being like kind of primarily being known as like flippers and doing flips and stuff like that, what was like one of the biggest, or maybe a couple of the biggest differences of like, hey, we're going from flipping a project to doing a whole new build and things? How was that different, and how did you handle that?
Yeah. So we don't hire a general contractor. We kind of manage our own. We kind of save that 20% markup. Yeah. And I mean, it's our full-time job. So we go around, we meet subs, we bid out all our projects, which, nothing wrong with general contractors. They're great for people who want to be a little more hands-off than us. Yeah. So, I don't know. It's one of those things that you don't really know what you're getting yourself into. Finding a framer that could frame the entire house it was definitely a learning curve. So it took us quite a bit of time to find, a foundation contractor that was, licensed, bonded, insured, that had proof that they knew what they were doing, finding a framing contractor that was reasonable and could get to us in a timely manner. Because, I mean, a lot of framers, they're 6 weeks out, especially on a project like this, because it's, it's a most framers, we hired out framing, roofing, siding, windows. So our framing contractors did all of that. So that was like 6 weeks, from ground up. So we kind of it was a lot of shopping, trying to find somebody who was available within a reasonable amount of time, that we weren't just holding the property and sitting stagnant, especially because we were flipping the house next door and getting ready to list that. We didn't want to have just a empty foundation collecting water. Yeah. Because that would kind of affect our selling of the other house. So that was kind of the biggest learning curve is, you can't close the door and just get to it tomorrow. It's like, you kind of got to be on it today.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think it's, and what you're kind of saying here with all this stuff too, I feel like with flips, it's always, for that first flipper, it's always like, oh, it took a little bit longer than what I thought. Like that's always going to happen. I feel like with a new build, it's kind of the same thing. Oh my gosh, it's like you had that, you knew that, and you knew it in your head, but you still set a timeline. And all of a sudden it's like, oh no, this is going to, it just takes longer for, for permits or paperwork or things to be checked and things like that. Is that pretty consistent with like, yeah, that's how it went?
Yes. So we thought it would take like 6 to 7 months, and we are July 27th will be a year from when we bought the property. Give or take, we did kind of sit on it for a month before we decided to actually build on it. But I mean, from start to finish, it took about 9 to 10 months. I mean, it was definitely a process. The inspection with the city is much more in depth. And there is no leniency in a new build, on a traditional, 1950s home that you're flipping, getting those floor joists kind of sistered in. No, not going to happen. If there's something wrong, they want you to take it out and fix it completely. I mean, rightfully so. It's a brand new house. There shouldn't be anything wrong with it, and it should be up to code. So that was definitely, that was a process as well.
Yeah, no, good stuff. I really appreciate your insights and just you digging into this and you talking us through this, and you honestly too, your vulnerability of like, yeah, we shouldn't have done this, or we would have done it differently. But it all comes back to I really feel like that's one of my favorite things in just this business in general and real estate in general is like, no matter what I'm doing, I can probably do it better. And I'm just going to learn from what I'm doing now. And I feel like you and Courtney do an amazing job of that. And you talking about that too is great. So, yeah.
Sorry. Yeah. My kiddo just came in here. Can you pause it for a second?
Yep. Awesome. We'll jump back in here. We had a little visitor. Stacy and Courtney's son Landon decided to join us. So all good stuff. But Stacy, before we get you out of here today, number one, just thank you for your insights on just kind of that new builds and stuff like that. And you guys, you have it under contract. You're getting ready to close in the next couple of weeks. Yes. Is that right? So awesome.
We close next Monday.
Whew, congratulations on that. Very, very exciting. And as you guys, we'll have you back next year after you guys have done about 3 or 4 new builds again. Like you're
yeah, I definitely want to do it again. It was a process, but I guess appreciation's great, but it was a really good deal. I mean, it took time, but it was definitely, it's probably our highest profit we've had so far. So I wouldn't be deterred to doing it again. Maybe ask Courtney how he feels because he dealt with the contractors. So, he has, but he enjoyed it as well. He definitely would want to do it again. And we've kind of looked at other ones. We're kind of seeing what's happening with the lumber market at this point. I mean, I don't think it's outrageous. I think you're just kind of going to pass the buck to the buyer, but definitely want to be safe and getting into a project like that.
Yeah. So, before I get you out of here, I got one last question for you. As you're doing a great job. You've been an investor and you've kind of learned this market, and you've been in it for like 8 years now. You've seen kind of the transition that the Indy market has made and what's going on, and then you being a realtor as well. what's your like kind of why, like why should somebody invest in Indianapolis? Like why is Indianapolis such a great place for no matter what if you're flipping or new build or buy and hold, why is Indy such a great market?
They have every deal you could want. If you want lease options, flips, Airbnbs, new builds, long-term rentals, short-term rentals, they have a deal for everyone. So it doesn't matter what your investment skill is, there is something here. So I think that's the greatest thing about Indianapolis is no matter what you want to do, or even if you try something and you hate it, you don't have to go learn a new market. You can just change your deal structure, see what you want to do differently. You can, maybe you want to focus in like a Butler, Tarkington area, and you tried flipping and you didn't like it. I mean, you can still find a rental over there, or you can still do an Airbnb over there. So, you don't have to go learn a whole new city to stay in the game.
Yeah. So that's great advice. No matter what it is, no matter the type of house, strategy, or whatever, Indianapolis has a lot to offer, and I love you pointing that out. That's a great thing right there. Stacy, if somebody wants to they want to reach out to you, or they want to learn more about like kind of what you guys are doing, or just connect with you in some way, or you figure out what you and Courtney are digging into next, what's the best way for them to get in contact with you?
Yeah. So my email is, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
My email is Stacy at Indy Properties R Us, and that's Stacy, no E. And then I'm also pretty active on Facebook. So you can definitely check me out there. I'm in a lot of the groups as well. So you probably see my name pop up in a few posts, either offering or asking for help. So those are probably my two best contacts.
Awesome. Stacy, definitely follow her on Facebook and social media and stuff like that. You always get to see kind of what color are they going to paint their next door. That's what I always like to ask myself and see what they're doing. They've had some cool ones. They've had a purple one. They got navy blue, yellow. They've done a little bit of everything. So Stacy, thank you so much.
Yeah, for sure, for sure.
And if you guys need anything from me, reach out to me at brian@simplewholesaling.com. And with that, that's a wrap for this episode. And we'll see you guys next time. Take care.